Hello. First, let me familiarize you with the pattern before we learn how to paper piece. You'll notice that the pattern has no seam allowances indicated outside the dark line, the solid black line. We're going to be adding that as we trim. Each section is divided by a dash line. So when we're going to work on a section, we're going to cut it apart along the dashed lines. When you have a section that says C1, C2, for instance, you're going to sew those two pieces together before you add them to the B or the D pieces. And for the purpose of this demonstration, I have chosen the F and G pieces and have already cut them out along the dotted lines on the outside edge. And you will notice that there are numbers 1 through 5, and its first piece is white. That'll be where you're going to start. Then 2, 3, 4, and 5 over here, and 5 is the shirt color. So I've measured to see how big a piece I need to cut, and this is approximately 4 inches. So I'm going to add an extra inch to it so that I have plenty of room to adjust it on the piece of fabric. So I'm going to cut a 5-inch piece. Sometimes I'll cut a 5-inch strip because I'll be using those for other pieces. This is school glue. It washes out, and don't be surprised by the purple color. It disappears. You want to put just a little bit on there, and you're going to line this up along the 1 and 2, about 1/4 of an inch away, making sure that you have 1/4 of an inch here and at this end and past this end. This will assure you have enough fabric, and if you do this with each step, you won't shortchange yourself. So now I'm going to fold this back using the folding ruler, which is a piece of template plastic. It could be a business card, a credit card, or a postcard. Trim the 1/4 of an inch. That way you're going to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've measured for all the rest of them. I know that the next piece is going to be about 2.5 inches wide. If I were using a print, this would be face up. First one was face down. The second one is face up. And you line up the outside edges, keeping your 1/4 inch. Make sure you have 1/4 of an inch beyond here, this way, and this is the edge of this piece. Don't be surprised, because sometimes the edge is over here farther. It's on there. We're going to open it up at this point. You may want to put a pin or two in it so it doesn't move on you on your way back to the sewing machine. Start outside that dash line by 1/4 of an inch at least. That's in your seam allowance. And then sew right down the seam. Right, just follow that straight line all the way down to where it meets up with the next line. And stop and trim. Take this to your ironing station. I like having normally my ironing set up right next to me on the right hand side and my cutting board on the left. And then I'm going to just press this seam. Make sure there aren't any little folds in there. Okay, I've got a lot of extra here, so I am going to just go ahead and trim off this extra at the bottom. You notice how I put the add a 1/4 ruler right up against that line. And because it has a little lip on it, you can feel where it bumps. Okay, now for piece 3, we're going to put the folding ruler right along the line, fold over and crease it. I leave the folding ruler in there while I cut it because it gives me a little bit thicker edge there. Now I can move that out of the way. Grab my next dog piece, and I'm going to line it up again. This time I want at least 1/4 from that edge. Line it up along there, here, and I've got plenty there. So I'm going to take it over here, start 1/4 of an inch outside, and follow the line. And back to my little mini iron here. There we go. Sometimes I have students ask, well, where should I start? And I always tell them, you're going to have to do it all, so wherever you want to start. Okay, the next piece is piece 4. I'm going to take my folding ruler, do the same thing I did in previous ones, crease it, add 1/4. There we go. And then I'm going to add the wide piece that I cut for this. Face up. All pieces other than the first one go face up. I'm at least 1/4 of an inch back. I've got lots of fabric here and out there. So we're all set. Slide it over here, 1/4 of an inch back. Make sure everything's still lined up. And so past the ends. And then we're going to go over here. Press, press, press. Make sure there aren't any little folds. And I'm going to trim this off. And since this is in the way, I'm going to trim this off too. Now, next piece is our shirt collar. I like my dogs to be wearing Hawaiian shirts, but you know, these dogs could be wearing checks or plaids or Christmas fabrics, whatever you'd like. Now this time you'll see that the printed side, since this does have a front and a back, goes face up. We're going to line this up on here, at least 1/4 of an inch beyond. The fabric comes out to here, so we're almost an inch beyond there. Bring it over here, make sure it's still lined up. Start at least 1/4 of an inch out. And stitch it. Press. Okay, this is where we're going to add the outer seam allowance. The reason I don't put outer seam allowances on my patterns is because if you want to change the size, you'd have to deal with seam allowances that weren't 1/4 of an inch. This way, your seam allowances will always be 1/4 of an inch because you add them with the add 1/4 ruler. Okay, one more thing before I let you go. Actually, 2. Sometimes when you're putting the pieces together, you don't want to have a big wide strip, but you know that this number 2 piece fits on the white there. You could put it on the fabric so that it has 1/4 of an inch all the way around, then trim, and then sew that piece. Now I've gone ahead and made that piece, so what we're going to do is have it together like this. That was lucky. Okay, what I want you to do next is take a few pins, and you want to match the pieces that are going to match together. So I'm going to go where the dog's foot and leg and the seam come together here, and I'm going to match that with the opposite side so that it comes through there. And I'm just going to shove that pin all the way through. Then I'm going to the second leg. I'm going to do the same thing. Come through at the seam allowance and the new seam line. And I'm going to come through there and shove that pin all the way through. Lastly, well, next to lastly, I'm going to put the pin in at this point. Make sure it comes through at that point and fold that down. These come straight through, and I'm going to pin that one in. This one again straight through where it matches up. And then I'm coming over to here, and I'm going to pin that point and match it up at that point. And now I'm ready to sew that seam. Pull that pin out a little bit. Get that out of the way. And you want to come right along that edge of the paper, but not to where you're sewing into it, because that'll make your seam allowance and your seam line bumpy. You just want to come right along the edge of it. Okay. Now we're going to open it up and see how nicely it fits. Take this to your sewing machine, to your ironing board, and press it. Don't press on this side because often the ink will come off on your machine, on your iron. Press it on this side. You may press those seams open if you want, or I usually just let it go the way it feels most comfortable going. Good luck with your project, and thank you for listening.